Very good evening and welcome to the In Focus. I am Ethan Tashavia. There's a lot of business going on around town, Kigali, and that's why we're talking business tonight on the In Focus. Quite a number of things to look at. Africa's economies have been described by experts as lions on the move. Despite the economic challenges that the world is facing today, Africa's economies continue to move in the right direction. In Rwanda, the Private Sector Federation launched what they called the Golden Circle Forum, which brings together the champions of the, of the industry, rather the captains of the industry and like-minded business leaders to network and engage in constructive dialogue. On the ongoing 22nd Rwanda International Trade Fair, which has attracted over 25 countries, this is an opportunity not only to sell, to buy, but also a platform for marketing and linking local traders to the international counterparts for exchanging business ideas. The Expo is one of the events that has grown steadily over the last couple of years, 20 or so. Given the expectations of the market and consumers at large, the Private Sector Federation has come up with an event that will bring captains of the market under one roof to discuss bigger deals. This event is called the Golden Business Forum. Call it the World Economic Forum of Rwanda. And that's why it's going to be bringing together over 350,000 participants in Kigali. But before we get there, we have a couple of questions to ask. Why is this event and what does it mean to the Rwandans? And there are quite a number of opportunities that have been opened in that regard also that African businesses need to explore, among them including the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. And of course, there have also been, treaties on the region, specifically in the East African region. Quite a number of questions to ask. But before we get there, I want to remind you that you can participate in this conversation with the hashtag InFocusRW, and I'll be ready to read them right in the middle of this conversation. Before I introduce my panelists tonight, let's watch this short video that will bring us up to speed of what we want to talk about tonight.
In March 2018, at a historic meeting of the African Union in Kigali, Rwanda, member states agreed to create an African Continental Free Trade Area. Subsequently, 52 of 55 African Union member states signed up to the agreement, representing a remarkable degree of consensus across the continent. The general public seems to be equally enthusiastic. An opinion poll carried out in November 2018 by the Rockefeller Foundation of over 2,000 citizens across the continent confirmed that an impressive 77% of Africans believe that the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement represented an important step forward. But what does this agreement mean in practice, and how will it affect us? The first thing to point out is, well, it isn't simply a free trade agreement. It's actually much more than that. It's about establishing a unified continental market, including the free movement of labor and investment. Let's focus on three major benefits of the Continental Free Trade Area. Africa is a big continent. You could fit the US, China, and Europe into the continent and still have space to spare. But in economic terms, individual countries are still very small. Take Rwanda, for instance. It's one of the fastest growing economies in the world, but in terms of size, it ranks number 143rd out of 193 economies in the world. This matters because small economies often struggle to attract the much-needed investments. Collectively, the story is very different. The African continent, all 54 economies together, have a collective GDP of $2.5 trillion. That makes it the 8th largest economy in the world, just behind India. And with 1.2 billion potential customers, it makes the continent much more attractive to investment, both from within and from outside the continent. This will encourage business people to make the investments necessary to sustain economic growth and create the job opportunities the continent badly needs. A second argument in favor of the Continental Free Trade Area is that it includes a protocol on the free movement of people. This matters because at present, traveling between African countries for Africans currently can be very challenging. Visas, Expensive air tickets, custom clearances, and border controls make it difficult to travel for pleasure and even more difficult to do business across borders. Currently, there are a lot of trained and skilled people across the continent coming out of schools, universities, and colleges who cannot find work. If free movement is endorsed, people will be able to use their talents anywhere in the continent where there is demand for those talents. The continent will be your oyster. A third powerful argument in favor of the continental free trade area is that it will increase trade between African countries. Less than 1/5 of all exports are currently from one African country to another. Take Kenya, for instance, the largest economy in the East African community. Each year, the country exports $1 billion to Europe and around $500 million to the US worth of products. Kenya's total export amounts to $6 billion. How much do you think Kenya exports to its neighbor Ethiopia? $1 billion? $500 million? $200 million? No. In 2017, it exported just $69 million to Ethiopia. Why? One of the main reasons is the high level of trade taxes. The Continental Free Trade Area Agreement is proposing to remove trade taxes on at least 90% of all trade between African countries. That will provide a big incentive to regional trade. The Economy Commission for Africa estimates that in Eastern Africa, the Continental Free Trade Area could boost regional trade by nearly $1 billion. And the principal sectors that would benefit would be precisely the ones that create much employment, like light manufacturing, processed foods, and textiles, creating as many as 2 million new jobs. African economies will find it hard to become strong economies unless they trade more amongst each other. There is an old Swahili saying that states, umoja ni nguvu, utengano ni udhaifu. United we stand, divided we fall.
Indeed, umoja ni nguvu, utengano ni udhaifu. United, we stand together. You had it all over there. Now, my panelists, you probably have seen them on our social media handles, specifically Twitter. But let me introduce them again. Let me begin with Mr. Andrew Mould, Acting Director of United Nations Commission for East Africa, the East African office, right? Yeah, perfect.
Economic Commission.
Then, of course, yes, we have Patience Mutesi, Country Director of Trademark East Africa.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Mr. Stephen Ruzibiza, PSF CEO. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I probably believe you had a busy weekend.
Pleasure is mine.
There is a lot going on, specifically Expo. How is it?
I'm not complaining.
How is Expo?
I think the business people are happy.
Yeah.
The visitors also happy. Mm-hmm. The volume and the traffic is good. So by end of the day, I think I'm waiting for comments. So far, no complaint. Mm.
There's a lot that we, from the video that we've just watched, quite a number of non-tariff barriers, let me call them, that are hindering the progress of African business to move forward. Of course, there's quite an optimistic let me say, optimistic approach from all people saying that Africa's economy is growing in the right direction. But there's quite a number of challenges. We're on, visa issues, all these non-tariff barriers, let me mention them. Do you think the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement is going to help so much to address all these things, or it's just another paper that is going to be added to other instruments that we've seen?
I personally believe, Afan, that it's a very big step forward. Yeah. It has the potential really to change things on the ground. And you're quite right to stress the problem there's been with non-tariff barriers. The UN Economic Commission for Africa's estimates, which were much quoted, the 52% increase in intra-African trade due to the implementation of the AfCFTA would actually double if there are measures at the same time to reduce the non-tariff barriers. And that includes measures to improve infrastructure. So, yes, I mean, I'm one of the optimists in terms of the potential of this agreement. It's a very powerful impact if we get the accompanying measures. So, for example, standardization, harmonization of product standards, phytosanitary standards. Those are the kind of non-tariff barriers which have been really very persistent barriers to trade. And I think there's a degree of seriousness, as you can see, at the continental level. So for the fact that 54 or 55 African Union member states have now signed up to the AFCTA is sign of a really strong level of consensus across the African continent. Now, clearly, in terms of implementation, the next steps forward, some of the building blocks are already there. So, for example, within the East Africa community, there's been an agreement at the level of the tripartite with COMESA and SADC to move forward to that tripartite block. That would represent a large step forward in terms of implementation of the full African Continental Free Trade Area. And COMESA already has in place some of the important institutions that would need to make that market work. So, for example, it has a competition authority already. So I think using the existing building blocks and the regional economic communities, we could actually get to implementation quite quickly.
True. We're starting from the African perspective. We'll probably at some point zero it down to Rwanda, but going through, of course, East Africa, that your area of focus. But let's look at Africa, and in terms of the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, I believe you meet many business people from the continental perspective. In those corridors, conversations that you have in the corridors, probably in the meeting areas, what do you think they're so optimistic that this is actually going to work?
Yes, I think the degree of optimism is really encouraging. A lot of studies have been done on what the CFTA means for businesses in Africa. And I think the case is really, really strong in terms of the benefits for businesses. You have a combined market of 1.2 billion people. I don't think any business would not want to take advantage of that. You have a combined GDP of over $3 billion. And I think it's really, really clear that if the building blocks are thought through really well, the businesses are the ones that will be benefiting. And not just the businesses, but also the individuals, Africans in general. So there is optimism. Businesses are really excited about what the CFTA could offer, but that doesn't mean that, they don't question the process, because we've seen a lot of political willingness for the CFTA to work. But I think where we need more clarity, or where businesses need more clarity, is in terms of how do we actually get to that? How do we actually get to ease movement of people across borders? How do we make it easier for goods that are produced in Rwanda to access our West African market, in terms of not just infrastructural challenges, access to the markets, but also the standards. And I think Andrew talked about it in terms of harmonization of standards, the fact that different countries have different expectations and different, expectations and standards and interests. Sanitary and phytosanitary standards are different across the continent. Quality standards are still different. There are multiple non-tariff barriers. So all those things, I think there's still a lack of clarity on how do we go past, the political willingness and actually get to implement the CFTA. But to answer your question, there's a lot of optimism on what it could actually offer businesses in Rwanda and beyond.
Glad there is optimism, but how do we translate this optimism to concrete action? Especially, I want to know what Rwanda's Private Sector Federation is doing to make sure that they grab this opportunity, this bigger market that has come open for them.
Thank you, Tashavia. One of the things we are doing, you already mentioned it, is the conference which we are planning this week on Friday, 9th. It's a Golden Night Business Forum. Where we are bringing business operators across the continent to talk business. And one of the topics to discuss is CFTA, the implementation of CFTA, what it means, and what are the challenges likely to be faced. We are discussing now the statistics, the market, combination of markets, the lacking infrastructure, and all these other enabling factors. At the end of the day, the success or the failure of CFTA is going to depend on the private sector business operators, because these are the implementers. We have policymakers who are putting in place policy, infrastructure, but who's going to use the infrastructure, who is going to test the good or the bad of the policies are the business operators. So during this forum, we are doing this, that we are going to host is to sensitize the members, let them know what is outside there, how many countries have ratified, signed the protocol and its agreement, and how long is it going to take. There are a number of things that are embedded in this agreement, those which are going to be implemented in 5 to 8 years, 3 to 10 years. So those are some of the information that they need to know. So basically we are doing sensitization and marketing of it. We are waiting for the government to pay for marketing.
Impressive. Quite a brilliant idea. Golden Business Forum. It's probably the first we've seen on the continent, isn't it? And quite, how do you make, I'm excited hearing that, quite the Golden Business Circle, big, probably billionaires and all that coming together under one roof. Won't this be another meeting? Do you have much expectation with this, Andrew? Maybe let me begin with Steve.
Let me take it.
Yes.
True, as you said, it's first of its kind, organized by private sector, but not of its kind outside here. We have had a number of business forums organized by different stakeholders in Rwanda, even outside Rwanda. But this time it is more of the business people. We are looking as private sector, the apex body, who are the organizers and the moderators of the business. See, what do we discuss other than the political part, the policy frameworks? What is it that we are going to bring? See, when we are going to implement CFTA, we are not going to rely 100% on the raw materials and all these equipments from Africa. We are going to rely on external markets. And we have diverse markets. We talk of China, we talk of Europe, we talk of America, North America, all over the world. And we shall need all these key stakeholders involved. Once their products or goods are in Africa, how do we treat them? The rules of origin, the human capacity, the skills that are going to be needed on this market. So this is the concept that we are bringing in terms of this business conference. We are bringing the implementers and the facilitators, who are the government policy makers.
Interesting. And quite an impressive one. But let's look at now, go back into the details of these challenges, including the visa policy on the African continent. Let's look at how the connectivity, the openness of the skies. Let's look at how the border controls. How long can we, have these non-tariff barriers, and what can we do to actually make sure that all these things are done away with?
Well, I think the answer is quite straightforward, actually, Ethan. It's actually implement the protocols around the African Continental Free Trade Area. So, free movement protocol is an essential part of it, as are the protocols on competition policy, on intellectual property rights, on investment. We need a degree of harmonization across the continent to make sure that trade and business flows freely. Now, you mentioned a number of sectors there which are impacted by non-tariff barriers. It's always struck me that if you look at the trade figures now for Rwanda, you find that services are more than 50% of total exports. And so the Continental Free Trade Area isn't simply about merchandise goods crossing frontiers. It's actually about services trade. And I think Rwanda, for example, has some very specific interests in the services trade, with Rwanda Air, for example, with the ICT sector, transport sector. Those are all important contributors to the Rwandan economy. And they stand to benefit from this Continental Free Trade Area, from the liberalisation. Now, of course, liberalisation, I think, as President Kagame often says, is a two-way street. So countries will expect to export more, but in other areas they may expect to also import more. This is all positive, ultimately, because it's the way that you're going to get value chains spreading out across the region and across the continent. So, I mean, we've done simulation work for all the member states across the East Africa region, and we're getting some very compelling results about the potential impact. But, I mean, I'd like to pose you a question. Where do you think Rwanda would principally benefit from the implementation of the AFCTA? Where do you think the exports would be going?
That should be you should be the one to answer that question.
I'm putting a question to you just to see if you could give a stab at it. But yeah, I mean, it's actually neighbouring DRC. And that happens to be the case for the same simulations we do for Uganda and Burundi as well. That DRC will be the principal market where there'd be an expansion of Rwandan exports. And I think that's very interesting. Because, of course, with the East African community countries, we've already eliminated the tariffs. We have a common market there, so that's not going to be impacted directly by the implementation of the AFCTA. But with DRC, we still have these problems of high tariff barriers and also non-tariff barriers. Now, there's two ways to resolve that. I know there's current discussions about possibly the DRC becoming a member of the East Africa community, and that would certainly be one solution. But the other possibility is actually simply the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area, which would put those trading relations on a much firmer footing, you see. So we believe that there will be major benefits from the implementation across the board, but for different countries in our regional bloc, there would be different trading partners where there'd be largest increases. And for Rwanda, coming back to my initial point, I think services is a key area. So service liberalisation must not be forgotten. We must not just simply confine the discussion to simply merchandise trade.
Sure.
It goes far beyond that.
You brought in quite an impressive, area of focus here, the East African community, and good stuff, the East African bloc. But we've seen in the recent past trade sabotage, let me call it, where probably national interests going higher than the
I think it would be safe to say that things haven't necessarily been going in the direction we would like to see in recent time. We actually recently did a study for the East African Community Secretariat on this and looked at the degree of intra-African trade and did see that there had been a sharp decline since its peak year in 2013. Where it was $3.5 billion worth, and it was down to 2.4 by 2017. Now, the non-tariff barrier story that we talk about between Kenya and Tanzania was a major part of that, but clearly current trade disputes that we see perhaps between Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, for example, they haven't helped matters, but the large part of the story there is actually the story between Kenya and Tanzania. And I'm confident that these are teething problems for the regional bloc, because I believe that the arguments in favour of greater cooperation are so compelling that we will get back on track with the East Africa community as well. But in the meantime, the African Continental Free Trade Area promises to also unlock a lot of other trading opportunities across the region and with near neighbours. So, for example, DRC is one principal beneficiary. For Kenya, Ethiopia is clearly, as the video was saying, a very clear potential market, which is currently looking again at its policies, and it's signed up to the AFCTA now. So we could hope to see significant increases of trade between the two largest economies in our regional bloc. Kenya.
But we can't move forward. We can't move to the bigger picture of Africa when we are having issues, with our immediate neighbours. Is that possible, Patience?
There's definitely a possibility, and I think the issues that we're seeing in the region are not they're not unique to the East African community, and certainly not only to Africa. These are things that along the way there will be stumbling blocks, but as long as you're able to show the case for a strong case for economic gains for businesses and for the individuals, for you and I, then we'll always get back to the basics. And the basics are that integration is good. Integration, you'll see benefits for businesses, for countries in terms of the revenue collections, the GDP growth. There is obviously a case that has been presented for sustainable economic growth. There is no growth without integration. So these things, they're expected along the way, and if you're able to deal with the underlying factors, which are sometimes security, sometimes unemployment, I think at the end of the day, it's really important that we can get economies to integrate. And at the end of the day, I don't think we can talk about a an Africa that has a voice without integration. And I feel that from the time we started with the Agenda 2063 to where we are today, there's a lot of understanding on the ground. The citizens within our regions, when you talk to them about the CFTA, there's a better understanding. I think there's a lot more work that needs to go into really understanding what their role is and bringing the private sector to be part of the policy making. And to get back to your point, the question that you raised with the CEO of PSF on what the role of the private sector could really be with the upcoming business forum, I think it's really, really important to get the private sector, as you sensitize them, to also understand that this is the time that they need to put in, their voice needs to be heard in these policies that are being made. I feel that the CFTA has really been a discussion around how do we get the countries to sign up for the CFTA? It's been a lot around ratification, but the private sector seems to be left out of it. How can they be part of the policies that are being made? How do they make sure that the CFTA actually works for them at the end of the day? And how do we also bring them on board to fix the challenges that are on the ground? For example, I think there's a big opportunity to bring the private sector to participate in PPPs for infrastructure development, specifically trade-related infrastructure, so that at the end of the day, we're fixing one issue that has been identified in the CFTA, but we're also bringing the private sector to play a significant role in its implementation.
Sure.
If I may just add to what Patience is saying, actually, I mean, I believe the engagement with the private sector is very timely at this present moment because, you know, the negotiations on the AFCTA are at a very crucial juncture. So in principle, the tariff schedules, there was a deadline actually that was supposed to be already finalized. But for services trade, for example, it's the end of the year. So people in the services sector, in the private sectors, need to make their voice heard now to government officials so that they're aware of where their interests lie. Likewise, with the protocols, I think if you look at the Protocol for Competition Authority, this is a very important element in the continental free trade area. You do hear sometimes, for example, people complain that they believe that it will only be the large multinationals that will benefit from this and not the small and medium-sized enterprises. Well, the competition rules and regulations will be part and parcel of the solution to that potential problem. But the private sector has to be engaged on that. So, I mean, you mentioned that this is one of many meetings, but actually, really, I think we're just, I don't know if Stephen would agree with this, but we're just starting on the engagement with the private sector. And I believe it goes even beyond that, because when we talk about things like free movement protocol, then it needs to be the general public as well needs to be informed of it, because ultimately they will be the main beneficiaries from this process. They will see lower prices for the goods which are imported from within the continent, and they will benefit in that way, you see. So I think it's very important that we engage at all levels, civil society, private sector, as well as with the governments.
Sure. Stephen, I suspect this has been the most difficult period going by the current situation on the region. I suspect this has been the most difficult season for the Rwandan investors, the Rwandan businesses, especially accessing the regional market. What is being done to make sure that the Rwandan businesses even explore opportunities beyond the region, East Africa?
Actually, it has been a challenge, but not the hardest moment for the business people, because there had periods where they faced it hard. They didn't have alternative in the region, neither did they have alternative beyond the region. Today we have alternatives. If I'm talking about in the concept of Rwanda, today they have alternatives. We can take a flight from here to where the market is affordable, and you have an alternative. Two, these are issues which I believe if the policymakers or the parties concerned had the will, they can be sorted overnight. But there are other factors which need the long-term planning, which need resources. If you're talking about infrastructures, it will take years to construct a railway from end of the region connecting to Kigali and beyond. But it will take an hour, a phone call to the head of a state or director so concerned, and they sort of an issue overnight, and business will be no more, and you will never know that sometimes issues happen. So What is important for business people is that, one, at least there must be a will for the parties to discuss, to address these issues. Once that will is there, then they can continue doing business. If the atmosphere of discussion, if the atmosphere of trying to find a solution amongst all these challenges, then there is no problem. But in terms of what is existing today, of course, nobody wishes it to be at the plate now, facing it. But at least for Rwandan case, people have found a solution, and we, with our assistance and involvement and the government, we try to look for alternative sources. That is cheaper, that is number one. Two, even joining resources and the hands, people could import in bulk. They have facilities like bonded warehouses. They have shipping. Actually, it was a benefit for us to know that you can set up office in other countries where all these raw materials are coming from. There are few industries in the region which are the manufacturers. They depend also, they buy and dump, and we buy. So we have tried to address it through alternative sources.
Where do you see the Rwandan investors? Where do they see most of the opportunities? Is it in Africa? Is it in Europe, in Asia? You know, of course, you interact with them. You know this better.
The experience has shown me that business, you don't tie it to the tree so that you control it with a rope. Opportunities are everywhere. But where do you get a competitive edge is what matters most. If you are importing, where do you buy at a better price and you sell at a better profit? So all the markets are potential, and they see an opportunity. In Africa, yes, because the market is still a virgin. Very few have invested in Africa. In Asia, because the production is high and at an affordable price, so it is way forward. It is where you buy and where you sell. But in general, all the market is good for the Rwandan business people because they are everywhere. They're in Asia, they're in Europe, they're in Africa, they are in all continents doing business.
Interesting. Patience, must have been a very difficult season for Trademark East Africa. Of course, you know, looking at the situations between Rwanda, Uganda, Burundi, and all that. How have you handled at the Trademark East Africa? You are in charge of facilitating business. What does this situation mean to you?
I think with problems comes opportunities. So as much as the current challenges have been, you know, they've meant something for our business, it's also presented as huge opportunities to just look at, you know, where do Rwandan businesses currently stand? What are the challenges? Where are the real opportunities? So within East Africa, I think there's been a general problem that intra-Africa trade hasn't really grown at the pace that we expected it to grow. But the biggest contributors for that, I think it's really important to say that the biggest contributors are the large markets, which is Kenya and Tanzania. So the challenge with Rwanda and Uganda, I think, as the CEO very rightly said, I think it has presented challenges, but it has also presented opportunities in terms of should we be looking at diversifying our sources of raw materials for the manufacturing businesses? Should we be looking at diversifying our markets also? And, you know, we see that there's actually some progress. There is some progress in terms of engagement. Where we are today is not as bad as where we were a few years ago because businesses are seeing alternative markets and alternative sources for raw materials. So yes, indeed, it has been a challenging period, but also in addition to what I just said, I think what we've seen is that there's a lot of trade that's happening between Rwanda and DRC. The recent challenges of Ebola have also kind of brought us back to the drawing table and say, you know, what is it that we can do? And at the end of the day, I think it's really important to note that as much as trade is important, trade has to be built on the right building blocks. So the citizens of every country need to be secure, they need to be safe. So that means that they should feel secure wherever they're going to trade. But in addition to that, also diseases, it's really important that we deal with those underlying issues before we can even talk about trade. So I think the future is bright, even with those challenges.
Interesting. Andrew, let's talk about regional blocks versus the bigger continental bloc.
Do you think at this particular moment regional blocks make sense?
Indeed, yes, they're the building blocks for the Continental Free Trade Area. Yes, I mean, I think, you know, if you look at the text of the African Continental Free Trade Area, it makes very clear that they consider the regional blocks as the building blocks and the stepping stones towards the Continental Free Trade Area. So it shouldn't be seen as one thing against another. The East Africa community will continue to exist, and it is actually in nature a quite different project in the sense that it's a project of deep long-term integration. It includes monetary union, it includes political federation. So it is another kind of project. The Continental Free Trade Area is about unifying blocks amongst them. So within the EAC, I think the EAC has done well it's eliminated the tariffs amongst countries, although we still have these non-tariff problems. But the Continental Free Trade Area is about integrating the EAC into the wider African economy. And that's where we see a lack of integration. So the example that was given in the video is the fact that Ethiopia, which is outside the East Africa community, of course, trades very, very little with its neighbours to the south. And that doesn't make any kind of economic sense that the two largest economies in our sub-region do not trade with each other. So DRC is another example, but we have further examples, Tanzania and Mozambique. They share, I believe, about 800-900 kilometers of frontier, and yet the amounts of trade are abysmally low. Yeah. We could talk about 25 million US dollars. So that's where I think the Continental Free Trade Area will help the East Africa Community Project in terms of integrating itself into the African continental economy.
I'll take that as a scholar's perspective.
Yes.
Let me take...
I'd say practitioners, actually. I mean, sure. Not so much theoretical. Yeah.
I just wanted to say, indeed, right now, there's no clarity over when it comes to the CFTA, the negotiations, whether this is going to be done at individual country level or at RECT's level. However, in terms of the benefits, we cannot deny that at the end of the day, the African continent having one voice, you can't compare that to the RECTs. So I think there's a lot of discussion that needs to go into how exactly do the RECTs see themselves as contributing towards negotiating the African Free Trade Area. But at the end of the day, it doesn't take away the fact that if Africa is negotiating, today if you look at Africa as a trading partner, as a bloc, we are as a trading partner of, say, the EU, we are the third largest trading partner after US and China. If you look at the RECTs or individual countries, it doesn't make sense at all. We're nowhere at the table. So the case for the CFTA is there, and it's just about making sure that the RECTs understand their role in negotiating for the CFTA.
True.
If I may say a few words on this. A simple way of saying it is that CFTA is not coming to compete the regional blocks. Rather, it is to complement and enhance it. So nobody is going to lose a big share of the cake, but rather we are going to work towards a big picture. So what the regional economic blocks have been contributing, how do we improve it better? The good thing is that CFTA is going to learn from the challenges these economic blocks have faced. So it's not new in terms of looking at the markets. Rather, it is how do we make the ESC work better, 24 hours if it is 24 hours? How do we improve the rules of origin? How do we fast track the human capacity, free movement of people? Because if you look at the ESC region, there are neighboring countries along the ESC region where the countries in ESC blocks have more interest and benefits, but they have been hindered by the fact of the ESC community rules and regulations that regulate them. But if these are removed and they are seen as one big block, then there is no who is swallowing who. It's rather a complementary approach, the way I see it.
Interesting. The conversation continues, but before we get to the next, the next phase of this conversation, let's go for a very short break. When you come back, we'll probably be reading some of your comments and your opinion on our Twitter handle, and then we'll go straight into, of course, the more of understanding of the Golden Business Forum. Okay, I understand we still have so much time to talk and engage. So let me go straight to you, Stephen. What is behind the Golden Business Forum?
Well, in terms of organization, it is private sector who are behind it. But the big picture is to have this event as an annual event, where business people are coming together for more than 1 day or two to discuss and talk business. We have noticed that business ideas, business environment is often changing. Today we have these rules, they are dropped before they are tested. So there is a big dynamics going on around the world, the economic war that is taking place between big economies, the African conflict, small bit of it, but all at the end of the day, these have an impact, positive or negatively, on business. So how do the business people come together and their own governance, kind of, to discuss and formulate policies that should be fronted to the political policy makers? My colleagues have been talking about bringing private sector on board. It should be the other way around. How does private sector approach the government and come up with this kind of proposals, other than waiting for the government to come on and ask, what do you need? It should be, this is what we need. You do it, or you don't do it, we shift somewhere else. If I give you an example, I think there was a bit of secession when Barcelona wanted to secede itself from the main Barcelona, and the information I got, I don't know true or false, is that the business people are the one who stepped on everything. They were like, no, if you want this city to move away from the main Spain, yeah, then we are locating our businesses. And all of a sudden, there was that kind of... So that's what we want to see. How the business community influence the business policies, influence whatever is going around in the business sense and the political sense. Positively, though, not overthrowing the government.
Let me ask, I think we should... Welcome back. We're still talking about business, anything business, but specifically doing business in Africa, doing business in Rwanda, and what the Rwandan businesses need to do to make sure that they explore businesses, rather opportunities, just beyond the borders that we have here, whether it is Rwanda, specifically East Africa, Africa, Europe, all over the world. And let me read quickly some of your comments. This is the Fitumuchiza Yosani. Africa is indeed a great market for her country's produce, but some issues still block the flow of the business. Sometimes movement in Africa is more costly than going outside. This is, I understand what he's saying, that you find it very difficult for Africans to travel within Africa than it is actually to go outside Africa. Mindset where we think things from member countries closing borders, mindset where we think things from Europe are better than ours. He has raised pertinent comments here and questions. There's this issue of mindset, there's border closing that we've probably been talking about. Let me see if we have some of the comments. PSF tweeting quite a number of times here, and this looks great. But this is enough. The Fito Michiza's comments are quite enough. These three issues. What is being done to make sure? How do we make sure that moving from probably here to Morocco doesn't require me to go first to Doha in Qatar and then come back to Africa? This is probably some of the issues. I wish I had CEO of Rwanda Air here to make sure that to tell us the issues they have been facing, trying to connect and also get open skies. But how do we address such an issue, Andrew?
Well, goodness, well, I'm not an expert in the transport services sector. I have observed, just from casual observation, though, that Rwanda Air, for example, seems to do very well, actually, on the intra-regional links. So, for example, the new flight to Kinshasa, I understand, is really quite in demand. I think the ones that are extra-continental are sometimes more problematic for regional airlines. So I know Kenyan Airways, I believe, recently cancelled its direct route to New York just because of lack of traffic. So within the continent, I think there's a lot of demand for increasing the air connectivity. And because a lot of these planes also carrying cargo, of course, that's a major way forward, isn't it, in terms of stimulating regional trade, particularly for Rwanda towards the east, where I feel that the strongest opportunities are for Rwanda. Because, of course, connectivity via road is rather complicated through the Congo. So I think that's not ultimately going to be resolved over the short to mid-term. So air transport is going to be a key part of the strategy, I think, to be able to take advantage of those markets.
I'm not disputing the ambitious targets of African airlines exploring, skies outside Africa, but they should be focusing on first making sure that they have, set their whatever their stand or their foot or their feet or whatever it is in the African countries first before they even explore outside Africa.
Yeah, I think the real challenge on the ground is, as much as it's about the political will of some of our countries to make the adjustments, it's also about policies that have been put in place. I think the promise of the Africa 2063, the Africa that we want, is, as much as one of the building blocks is the CFTA, we also have the common passport, the single Africa passport, but we also have a single Africa sky. So liberalization of the airspace in Africa is something that we haven't got to, because there's still a lot of countries that have a protectionist mindset, and it's always really been my understanding why it would be easier to let Air France or whatever airline it is to land in the country, but then when it's about Rwanda Air or Kenya Airways or Ethiopian Airlines, then there are questions, there are issues. So I think this is why I was saying that the real problem is it's a mindset shift that has to happen, because as much as there's a bit of a capacity issue with African airlines, there's also a mindset issue. We need more countries to open up to fellow African airlines. And I think that there is a bit of an improvement. In about 2016 or 2017, the contribution I'm forgetting the term, but the contribution of Africa travel was only 4% of global travel, air travel, 4% of global travel. I think that's a real problem, because it doesn't mean that you don't have Africans traveling. The Africans going all over the globe, but then not within the continent. And that points not only to the fact that the airspace has not yet been liberalized, it also talks to the protocol on free movement of people, because if you don't have the protocol on free movement of people liberalized, then also you can't really have the free movement of, the airlines will not be able to traverse the continent. So I think it's those two issues around liberalizing the airspace, but also getting the protocol on free movement of people signed up. And that we've seen, I think we had only, is it 2 countries signing up on the protocol of free movement of people? And that's because most countries are thinking, we open up and then what? You'll have the least skilled people maybe coming into our countries, and you still have that mindset of let's protect our borders, and this is a problem that we have on the continent.
It's about half the countries which signed up, but the ratification, I believe, has only been 1 country.
That's right, yeah.
So far, which is Rwanda, I believe. I was just going to add a point. I misspoke there when I said for Rwanda the main area of interest is east. I get my east and west mixed up. So it's to the west, of course. We're talking about DRC. I think there was interest at one point in Nigeria, Gabon, Congo-Brazzaville, as well as potential markets using the air transport link. But I just wanted to follow on for what Patience was saying about some of the advantages of service air transport liberalization. If I get a flight from Kigali to Addis Ababa, the average cost is around $450, $550. To get it's only a 2-hour flight. Now, if you get a similar flight in Europe, that would possibly cost you $100, $115.
That's it.
And that is the advantage from air transport liberalization. And I know Rwanda at one point, I believe, was promised a slot at Addis Ababa airport, but that hasn't yet happened. So where there's a lack of competition, you see those higher prices.
Indeed.
So that's one important point. I was going to give another example, actually. I went on a mission to Addis Ababa, and I took my phone from here, MTN, and left it on roaming. Now, I only made 2 phone calls while I was there. I was only there for a day and a half, and I came back to my office, and there was a query about the expense, what I'd be using my phone for. And it was the roaming charges in Ethiopia. It actually cost around $800 for a day and a half connectivity. Wow. 2 phone calls made. It was simply the cellular data was left on, and that was the price. And of course, that is where it raises business costs in a way which is just unreasonable, unfair. And I have to say, similar things used to happen in the European Union market as well, until there were large-scale protests and the competition authority stepped in and they said this is no longer acceptable. And they eliminated those roaming charges. So, I mean, I think that's where you'll see consumers will get a lot of benefits and firms will, by liberalising of the service sector and reducing the cost for everybody.
Interesting. We have less than 3 minutes, I understand. So, Mr. Stephen, I will ask you to probably give us a bit of insight of what we should expect as Rwandans and the upcoming Golden Business Forum. Are we going to see Rwanda Air signing deals? Are we going to see Ethiopian Airline? You know, all those kind of things.
We're expecting to see business associations signing agreements or MOUs or partnership between themselves for more engagement, for more sharing information between the two, or whoever will be signing the agreements. We're expecting Rwandan private sector to sign with DRC. We are just still waiting for the confirmations. And some other B2Bs, because we are going to have also a session on business-to-business discussions where people are likely to strike their deals without other third parties knowing. That is part of the discussion. Then after the forum, a whole day forum, in the evening, the guests will be invited for a dinner. So the dinner is on invitation.
Oh, interesting. So we are not coming. I don't worry.
If you are not
No
invited.
free lunch.
There is no free lunch.
But no, sure. Honestly, I think this is a very good initiative. I want to know the sustainability, the plan going forward. What do you plan to do with the Global Golden Business Forum?
As I said, it's going to be an annual event.
Yeah.
Like we have all these other business annual events where we are going to discuss a number of things. Today we have started a new one, so we don't go full board. We have to look at how it is moving. But trust me, we are going to have it as an annual event. More business people are going to be invited. The policymakers, ministers, or even the heads of states will be invited. And we are going to look at a number of topical across the spectrum. Be facilitation of business, investments, attracting investments, increasing intra-African trade, removing the barriers. Like these days we have a number of shortcuts across the borders, not because people don't have potential markets, but because of barriers. The border are not closing at the same time. The standards are changing more often. So there are a number of issues, tariffs and non-tariffs that are coming in. So those are some of the issues that we have to discuss.
And there's also a plan of, promoting collective investment. How far with that?
We have it in Rwanda so far. Around 5 companies have been formed.
Yeah.
The big importers have been assisted to collectively invest and import in bulk. Manufacturers have also been assisted. They have formed their own companies. They can buy raw materials in wholesale and do as input. So we are doing a big thing in terms of assisting Rwandan business community to form bigger companies, because if you form a company as a group, you have a leverage. You can negotiate more. You have the capacity to negotiate with the banks. You can influence businesses, policies with the government, even get incentives. So there have been a complaint outside here that RDB, the ministry is concerned, they are giving more incentives to the foreigners. So we're like, okay, let's take a big block and see if these policy makers will not give away out these incentives. So we were trying to test also. Luckily enough, we have succeeded and they have given incentives.
Clearly, if there is economic boom, everything seems to be, tends to go very stable, even in terms of security and everything.
You sure?
Yeah. Your closing remarks as we end this. Let me begin with you, Stephen.
Let me close my remarks on the issue of cost of transport in Africa.
20 seconds.
I will not even look at the distances. Just let's look at where the air has been liberalized in the region. The highest component of cost is airport taxes. If you compare the ticket fares and airport taxes, we discover the airport taxes are high. And who determines that? These are politicians. So if we can remove this, that is fine. Today we are having all the region airlines undercutting each other in terms of pricing. And at the end of the day, all of them, trust me, they will make a loss. Because as they undercut the fares, they are not undercutting maintenance cost, they are not undercutting the fuel, they are not engineering. All these as a variable costs are not going to be reduced because they can't produce them in the region. They're dependent on other service providers.
Thank you so much, Stephen. I'm told we have less than 20 seconds. Allow us to conclude this. Patience. Thank you so much, Patience. Trademark East Africa Country Director over there. We have, of course, Andrew Mold, acting Director of UNECA, East Africa. We have PSF Chief Executive Officer Stephen Ruzibiza joining us here. And of course, apologies we could not read most of your comments because we didn't have much of the time because the conversation was good. I believe you enjoyed it. And that brings us to the end of our conversation here on Rwanda Television in Focus. But it doesn't stop here because there's Golden Business Forum coming up. Of course, if you want to shop, Expo is still going on, and let's keep the conversation going and see how we can open our borders and remove these non-tariff barriers and make sure that our country, our continent is progressing very well. It's me, Esanta Jovia. Have a good night.